This is the Brick Commentary Central. You're listening to the BCC Podcast. It is Monday, April 29th of 2024, and you're listening to episode 291 of the BCC Podcast. I'm LQ. Joining me today is Maluris.
Yep.
Leo.
Hello there.
Mace.
Hello.
And Ford.
Good evening, everybody.
Got a full cast once again. Finally, following up on the second episode of this, which I guess is almost half a year later. This has been an episode a long time coming. Bionicle and Theology. Conversation about destiny.
Yes.
What is like one of the most controversial topics you can bring up in the Bionicle community?
Everyone has their own opinion
Lewis
about
pronouncing the name. That's it.
All wrong, but we're here to talk about destiny.
it. Wait, what'd you say, Kevin?
Forget about it.
I don't know. I don't know.
So,
Butter.
Destiny is a weird point in many shows because a lot of people say it doesn't make any sense. But then they'll say there's no way for Destiny to make any sense at all. But that's also not true. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about some theological principles concerning Destiny, some different schools of thought, some logical schools of thought, and then we're going to take a look and compare it to what is in Bionicle.
May I also talk about quantum mechanics
Sure, how about you get that out of your system now?
as relevant?
This is not a discussion
Can I
about
talk
Interstellar,
about
Leo.
Dune, Destiny? Like, it's pretty cool stuff.
Doomstiny.
So, we should probably start by defining what Destiny is in the frame of Bionicle, just to keep it more focused.
Bionicle is the second portion of this. Bionicle is
Oh.
the significantly less thought out version.
Oh, okay. Then I guess I'll let you go then.
Don't worry, we're going to start by talking about destiny within Christian thought,
Okay.
and then we're going to move into talking about destiny as it is within Bionicle and how it compares, what the author's intent was, what it logically makes sense as, and so on.
Mhm.
Alright, so when we're talking about destiny, we've got to talk about predestination. So, let's start off with that. Mace, do you know what predestination is?
I assume it would be the principle that everything was decided beforehand and you're simply living out the motions of it.
That is, can be a portion of it. Now, there's different ways to go about that, because there's predestination in the term of free will, if there's any free will, or if certain things are predestined and certain things are not. So, I'm trying to think of the best way to segue into this. So yeah, that free will is another topic that actually we probably should have discussed a little bit more beforehand, because somehow I got completely caught up in just overall destiny.
No, they kind of go hand in hand
Yeah,
at some
yes.
point.
So, this is a big question. It was obviously coming from a Lutheran background. A part of the Augsburg Confession is the discussion of free will. Specifically, it talks about the conversion of the Christian. There are three primary schools of thought within Christianity about predestination. There is double predestination, single predestination, and decision theology, which is Calvinism. So let's start with talking about Calvinism.
Oh boy.
The fun part.
This is what a lot of people will default to. In Calvinism, well, sorry, not a lot of people will default to this now, actually. The Calvinists are the really only ones. That is the idea that everything is completely predetermined and there is no free will whatsoever one way or another. So that means that some people are predestined to hell, some people are predestined to heaven. And there's just nothing you can really do about it. The other end of the spectrum is, as I said before, decision theology. And that is the idea that there is no, let's say, authority controlling exactly where we end up, what our destiny is. And in Christianity specifically, there is no role of God in determining our salvation. We have to make that decision for ourselves. And that's how we're saved, according to decision theology. Then the third route, and this would be also according to Lutherans, and I don't really know the Roman Catholic theology on this one, but I know certainly for Lutherans and more of the classical view in a lot of cases, is single predestination. And this is a little bit more complicated, but also the only logical sense. The Bible talks two ways. It talks in one way of us having nothing to do with our salvation and that man can only come to faith by the Holy Spirit. It also talks about us having the free will to reject that faith. Double predestination says that we have no free will to reject that faith, which contradicts parts of Scripture. Decision theology says we have all the will to accept our faith and come to it on our own will, which contradicts other parts of Scripture. Single predestination is the idea that it's all God's doing to bring us into faith, but it is all our doing to reject that faith. So those are kind of the overlying definitions we're going to be using in this episode, so I wanted to lay them out now. Any questions?
So it probably doesn't have to be really stated that all of these have very big implications on the character of God and what he agrees with that which is revealed in the Bible or not.
Yes, very much so. So, obviously, with double predestination, that might be the most troubling one of all, because that is the idea that God created people to go to hell directly, which, for good reason, is absurd.
I mean,
there is
someone you think deserves, but then you think about yourself and it's like, do I deserve that? And it becomes more disturbing.
Well, yeah, in the context of Christianity, yet again, that creates a crisis of faith that is not Christian. Anytime the Bible talks about predestination, and it does, to give the Calvinists credit, it talks about being elect before the creation of the earth. It talks about Christians that way. It only talks about it in the sense where it is providing a comfort to the Christian. It never speaks of election or predestination in a way to cause fear of damnation. So that is kind of the important context whenever reading double predestination. Also, Leo made a list of Bible verses that deal with this subject. I'm just going to post in our chat for anyone in the audience who is interested in listening on their own or reading on their own time. Right now, we're just kind of laying out the terms to go into our broader discussion. And that list formatted horribly, but it's there. Yeah, that's these views are going to get relevant if we delve deeper into Bionicle here. It's just important we have a good baseline understanding of these different viewpoints when we determine what is it that Bionicle goes for in its mythology.
I mean, you can do the same kind of comparison with basically anything that talks about any kind of like foreknowledge or predeterminism about certain characters. Like Lord of the Rings touches on this gently,
which I think it does a good job of that too.
Yeah, but it also is based on the pre-cosmogonic myth that Tolkien wrote, the Ainu Lindley, about the song of the Ainur with the one creator God.
And
I guess depending on your depending on your interpretation of what Tolkien was going for with that, you could say that everything was already determined before in the song, but I feel like that kind of takes away the credence of the heroism, the action of the characters that's presented in the story, because the story is real life. Things aren't real until embodied. I think that's one of the important things to think about also with why God would even create to begin with, because he wants a real relationship.
And I think that's a trap that a lot of people fall into, is they think that predestination and free will are mutually exclusive when they're not. By definition of an all-knowing God, that God must know everything that's going to happen, or he's not all-knowing. However, that does not mean that that all-knowing God cannot also give his creation free will.
Yeah, this kind of resonates with me, what Leo just said. Yeah, with like the heroism of the characters. I'm thinking about like Job, okay? So, yeah, God knows that Job is a faithful servant, and the devil does test him, and it's pretty brutal stuff. But Job, as a man, like, continues in his faith and is to the point where he's just like, yeah, this is somehow my fault, and this is terrible. And eventually he does get to a point where he's questioning just about everything until God kind of comes in and slaps him upside the hand, but doesn't mean God doesn't know that Job is going to have these doubts when the devil approaches him and says, I want to test him. But God still allows that. So it's interesting. Yeah.
And on the flip side of that, a good character I think to talk about when we're talking about destiny in the Bible is that of Jonah. This could be very relevant to Bionicle, because is there any other man who tried harder to avoid the destiny that was laid out before him?
Not recorded.
Man literally runs the opposite way and then gets side quested into the main quest.
It's one of those things that you really feel like the Greeks had something going for, because like a lot of the Greek myths are also, the prophet says something to the king and the king is going to do everything he can to avoid it, but instead he brings it about by his own doing.
And yet Jonah very clearly has free will.
Yeah.
That does not mean that every one of his actions were just completely manipulated and he does not have his own being. But
no,
our own being does not mean too much when an all-powerful God decides what is going to happen, who is in control.
I mean, it's also like just very relevant because we don't have what happens around us. We just react to it. Like we can purpose to do such and such a thing. Whether we are able to do something or not is really God.
Now then, in the Lutheran understanding of predestination, specifically when it comes to faith, which faith can be attributed a lot to Destiny and Bionicle in this conversation, I think. Because what is Destiny and Bionicle? It's ultimately what that character does for the final good outcome. In the real world, what is the final good outcome? Well, it's that we have faith and that we live eternally. Now, in the sense of, again, the single predestination argument is there is a corruption that mankind needs saving from. We are sinful by Adam's first sin in the Garden of Eden. That's why the world is screwed up, is because we made it that way, and that we need someone to redeem us, and we can't do it ourselves. And that is why Christ came to die for us and renew our will, which is done, by water and word and baptism. And from there, that's when we truly have a free will, according to this understanding, is once we are living within Christ, because no longer are we a slave to sin. But, as we know, when you have that, it is still possible to willfully give it up and reject it.
What? You saying once you're saved, you're not always saved?
No, that is why the Bible specifically says some have made shipwreck of their faith. It's like saying that they never had a ship to begin with. Well, then what were they doing out on the water?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we got some of like those definitions out of the way. I want to make sure we explain like the basis of them, for I know I study theology as a hobby, so some things might come more naturally to me than people who have not studied this topic. So anything else think we need clarified for the baseline before we get into the Bionicle portion of this?
None of us are ordained.
Yes.
As such, speak for no authority on any church body.
Very true.
Yes, we did have that preface last time. Also, for those who are wondering, there's a picture up there, because we are talking about Tolkien, that's the Daggera, if I said that right.
Oh, good. I was wondering.
That was Tolkien's end time event that may or may not be canon, because he never actually finished it.
Well, yeah, that's I think that is only something that is discussed in the History of Middle Earth series.
Yeah, it is.
Like that's not even in the Unfinished Tales, if I remember correctly.
No, it might have been published in the Unfinished Tales, but I know for certain it's in
I think it was
History of
mentioned,
Middle-earth.
but yeah, History of Middle Earth at least has the section where it talks about Turin
Personally,
coming back to kill
I
Morgoth.
like it.
Yeah,
but
it makes sense for the feeling of the world.
yeah, I think it makes perfect sense, and I think the Silmarillion doesn't have a natural conclusion without it, personally. But that's not for this conversation. I just put it up there because we need some cool art to look at.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's pull up a picture of Bionicle instead.
Right.
But you know, when
figured,
you
like,
Google
last
Bionicle,
time-
you don't really come up with any good pictures.
That's why you got to go to the Biosector 01 image gallery.
Do they have that?
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Plenty.
pretty comprehensive
They got
from what I
all
can
of them.
tell.
Man, imagine the day when the Biosector 1 goes
Biosector.
down.
And hope not.
Let's see.
I've got all the guidebooks. I'm good.
Yeah.
Wait, no, I don't have the encyclopedias, but they're out of date anyway.
I don't have the encyclopedias either, but I'm also missing the crucial Matanui guide to Barra Magna.
Ooh, I got
Makuta
that one
guide to the
years ago.
universe.
I found
But
that years ago. on
Makuta has a
Amazon.
guide to the universe, though.
Yeah, but that's to the universe with it.
What would the universe be without, though?
So a big portion we're actually missing in this discussion, I want to acknowledge it right out the bait. We have not discussed deities in the Bionicle universe just yet.
Nice.
There are no deities in the Bionicle universe.
Well, it's debatable.
God is a
It is
bunch
debatable.
of scientists, okay?
Greg certainly took it that direction, but it was not the original intention. And there's still room in the story for it to be different.
But even then, it is still debatable.
So we're not going to touch that subject right now.
Rangi and Papu barely count. They were
Not just
hardly
them,
involved.
okay? So, that's a good way to cycle into this portion of the conversation, though. Let's talk
Oh
about
yeah,
how
you chose the true form of the GSR.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool. It's
Yeah.
a cool drawing.
It is a cool drawing.
Mhm.
I wouldn't have minded if this was the true form, honestly.
I mean, but they were holding on to that art since the very beginning.
I know, but I mean, then you would have had a set of it.
Like, good payoff.
Yeah. Anyway, we're gonna avoid. We don't need to talk about that portion of it either. So, for
Not yet.
the sake of this conversation, let's start by evaluating Destiny Bionicle and how that changed over time in the story.
I figured we begin with like what BSO1 defines as destiny.
Yes. What does
since that's what we
Swart
were doing
say?
last time. Okay, Swart says,
It's not just Swart.
Oh no.
the third final virtue, destiny is the true goal of every being in the Matoran universe. Preordained by Matanui at the time of their creation, a being's destiny can alter over the course of their life, given drastic enough circumstances. Destiny is the most difficult virtue to interpret, and is often misconstrued to disastrous consequences. Even if an ultimate destiny is known, the path to the destiny is often unexpected. Though it is possible for a destiny to not be achieved, the unpredictable nature of it often ensures that it is completed. After completing their destiny, Toa are able to sacrifice their Toa power for the greater good and become Turaga.
So, I think a good preface to this is, do we take Greg's word as gospel on everything related to Destiny?
No.
Yes.
Maybe.
No.
A little bit of both.
The duality of man.
So, for the sake of it having a fun, I believe, or I don't know if believe is the right word, but I acknowledge that there is a certain form of Bionicleism that everything Greg says is the final word on the subject. And I think that is the most accepted and fine way to enjoy the story. However, the further Greg is disconnected from when he was originally writing it, I do believe what he says on the subject becomes more questionable. And I also know originally Greg was not the only author of Bionicle. There were other visions that went into it when they first started creating the series, and Greg kind of took it over, and as he went on, Greg definitely took more of the sci-fi approach to things over the fantasy approach.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not bad within itself, though I personally really enjoy the fantasy elements of the earlier portions of Bionicle.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd kind of like to have part of this discussion looking at Bionicle through the original lens of fantasy, and then we can also talk about it through Greg's lens of sci-fi. Does that sound like a good structure?
Yeah,
sounds
well,
good.
if you're wanting to like even go with that, I think from the original story Bible or not the original, from that draft of the story Bible we got a look at, it seems to me that there is always going to be this hard turnaround into sci-fi, just by nature of all these myths have a physical interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's going to be some point where they interacted with reality at one.
Yeah,
So I think it's always Bionicle's always destined to take a sci-fi.
No, I think that's correct
true.
too. But I don't think, at least I don't get the vibe that originally that all of the paranormal was supposed to be explained by the end. Some of it certainly was, but I think Greg took it a step further than they originally intended.
Yeah, although there are also clearly stuff that got dropped.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like placing Aqua Magna in a larger world than just being its own water world was probably one of those things that ended up growing. So,
where do we even start from this? There's so many angles.
Oh, that's a good question.
Now, this page doesn't have sources.
No, that's...
I recognize some of these quotes from Greg, though.
Yeah.
Because I know the part about Destiny being able to change. Is that in the stories itself? Because I'm going to take the written literature as the highest source of canon.
Okay, I'm going to say my interpretation of that. It was like, okay, it sounds weird, but you go from Toa Likan to Turaga Likan, you go to Toa Metru to the Turaga.
Mm-hmm.
Their destinies are fulfilled in a way, but then they change to suit the needs of others. So, like, Turaga Likan inspires the Toa Metru to obviously go forward and save the Matoran, sacrifice themselves for the Matoran. The Turaga, the Toa Metru, that obviously their destinies, they save the Matoran and everything, but then it kind of changes to guiding the Toa Mata to becoming, the new guardians and protectors. So that's kind of how I figured on it myself, but
it may also help us to specify what exactly how most often Destiny interacts with the Matoran and the Toa and Turaga. Kevin, you've been touching on it a bit there with the transformation cycle, but I think it should be noted that at one point I can't remember where it was clarified, but like not all Matoran are destined to transform into Toa.
Right.
And in that case, destiny really just comes down to a programming
Well, that
function.
there's an interesting question for that though. What happens if Matoran who's not destined gets a Toa stone? We never really saw that.
Because it wasn't
No.
destined.
The assumption, based on what we've been told in the story, is that it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
But there's also another assumption you can take.
It would be like
it would never happen that a Matoran who's not destined would even have a Toa stone.
Okay, but let's think about, I don't know, Nadiki, right? He's a Toa, but at some point freak accident happens to him where he's not so much a Toa anymore.
Yeah.
Was that because he wasn't destined to be a Toa? Was he
Well,
not destined to become a Turaga at any point? You know?
Well, if we look
Maybe
at
that's
this
why
through the lens
became a
of
Dark
single
Hunter.
predestination,
Time to see what Rudaka's Rutuka does again.
it's mutation.
Let's not bring up
Mutation.
Rudaka.
Well, yeah, it's mutation, but like, is it mutation the same way that the energized protodermis is mutation, and or no, Visarch venom is different from the energized protodermis, right?
yeah, that
And
was
how
the
it
Master of
operates.
Life. You said Vizon Fenric, right?
I said nothing about Vizon and Fenric.
I don't know what I heard then.
Vizorak.
Oh,
is the
Vizon.
next-
Vizorek.
Okay, you just
Yeah.
enunciated where it sounded
Yes.
like multiple words. Oh yeah, the Vizorek.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's different from the Viscerac venom. Because the thing that cures Rudaka's mutation Ratuka is her own mutation Ratuka.
Yes, because
Whereas-
they mutate according to her whims.
Yeah,
So
whereas
she
yeah,
it's her
whereas the
destiny.
only-
She picks
the-
her destiny.
Yeah, and the only thing that can cure the Hordika venom is
Kitangu.
is
Yeah.
Kitangu's Ratuka. Yes.
The key to Nangu.
So
So Leo, you bring up actually an interesting point, and one that still delves into the fantasy aspect of Bionicle is the energized protodermis.
Yes.
That-
So if the Toamata just never found it, or they never came into contact with it, would that have changed anything?
That's
Yes,
one
we
aspect,
wouldn't
but
be able to
also
sell so well.
the protodermis itself either creates or destroys, and that's entirely
Mhm.
based off of destiny. And even the living protodermis we see in Makuta's lair, it didn't know which it would be. But does that make it random? I don't think so, because the evidence we have of it, it's not a random transformation.
I believe Greg's idea was that it was, just based upon whether it was your destiny to change at some point.
Mhm.
That's where you get like the Toa into the Toa Nuva.
Which is an interesting aspect, because Mananui sets the destiny for the Toa, or according to this definition, but the protodermis was beyond Mananui.
True.
Well,
I feel like also-
Mananu is made entirely out of this.
Well, yes,
But it does
Unfortunate-
predate him
that would be
in
an
terms of
interesting
will.
aspect. So does Mananui, does his consciousness, which I think the protodermis actually is part of what caused the consciousness of the Matoran, didn't it? Or am I completely
No, that was purely
misheadcanoning
Velika.
That's purely Velika. Okay. What about Mananui's consciousness? Was that at
He was
all?
he was entirely engineered by the great beings.
Okay. I was thinking
What-
then, because if he had some interaction with the protodermis, that would have some effect on creating the destinies of the Matoran.
I think what you're forgetting would be the energized protodermis being
Yeah.
from Maze of Shadows.
That's what that's what I'm talking about in one set.
Okay, that's where you're going?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
that is finish your thought.
Because if I recall correctly in that story, the energized protodermis is it's sort of like a hive mind, where it's all portions of it are within the one being. Is that correct, or am I misremembering that?
I don't know if it's
Googling
ever
now.
really determined.
Okay, so there really wasn't enough information. But yeah, the way it spoke, it talked about is it their destiny with the Telemetry to be transformed or destroyed, and it didn't even know.
Yeah.
But it did also speak of it in terms of destiny.
Mm-hmm.
from what we can gather, the energized protodermis is the most powerful, I want to say form, entity in the Bionicle lore. Like, it exceeds that of the Great Beings. Because anything they did was just from the study of the protodermis.
Okay, it is a hive mind.
Okay. That's what I recalled. But I just find that interesting aspect just of the sci-fi versus fantasy elements of Bionicle. That would lean more into the fantasy still, where there's something beyond natural explanation. But moving back, I think Nadiki is a good case study for this one. Did Nadiki achieve his destiny?
I mean, if his destiny was to be incorporated into the Makuta, then yeah.
Did
It
Madanui
was.
create Nadiki to be incorporated into the Makuta?
Well, so here's the funny thing. So far as I'm aware, Matanui has Mator.
Sorry, Leo, you're cutting out.
Okay, I'll repeat myself then. So far as I know, Matanui does not have any actual creation of like Matoran, because they're made with that weird machine. I think the only thing he would be part of is whether the Turaga determined it was Matanui's will that there be more Matoran created.
I know what Mononui's will was. Mononui's will was to make sure that Nadiki could never be a good Dark Hunter, so he created Kreka.
But
Make sure that didn't happen.
okay, real quick on the serious note, I wish there was a source for this, but Biosector Owen specifically says the destiny is preordained by Madanui.
Okay.
And that brings up something
That may be a section of like how they're created.
Yeah, that brings up a point that I've been bugged by for many, many years, and you've heard about it before. So I'll get into it later, probably.
You can bring it up now.
Well, because the thing is, this is getting in more into, I guess, like the interplay between the sci-fi and fantasy elements is that if Modanui is just a robot, and he is just a robot technically, and all destinies are preordained by the robot, how would a robot be able to see far enough into the future to program some kind of, purpose for his beings even after the robot ceases to function? If each and every destiny that we have seen pertains to the functioning of the robot.
First off, Madanui's not a robot because he's biomechanical. Literally, parts of his body are made up of organic matter.
Which
True.
parts?
The
The
plants.
insides.
But does that really count?
Yeah, that's literally part of his body. Do
I think
your
a lot
white
of those
blood
were
cells
also-
count?
I think a lot of those were created by the Makuta, though. Like the plants and like most of the beasts. Were,
Yeah,
if
but
not
the
by the Great
Makuta
Beings.
That
had
was still
organic
part
matter
of-
too.
Part of it was
Like-
the upkeep of his body.
Yeah, but a lot of the stuff was also for whatever reason. This is the route that Greg chose. That the Great Beings put inside of my this like forethought that I'm going to create these things. Makuta, Rudaka species or Sidorak species.
Like, hey,
Well,
Toametru,
so-
can you protect my brain cells?
Real quick, so we don't get too off track before we
Thanks.
lose this, let's contain this discussion to within the Matoran universe.
Yeah, because outside it kind of
That is,
ceases
opening.
to function.
That'll probably have to be a future episode.
Sorry, you cut
No,
out,
it's a good,
so
valid
much
point.
during that.
It's a very valid point. But also, I would
You
make
cut
the
out
argue.
so much.
I'm cutting out.
Yes,
I can hear
gotten rid of
Liam
that.
fine.
Sounded fine to me.
Okay,
Okay,
that might be on
that's
your end.
Yeah.
I wouldn't doubt it if we do have
It's just a
connection to
phone
bring it up.
issue.
But that's
Oh,
okay.
yeah, I
we
am
might have to
getting
have
that
another
confused.
whole episode to debate: is Madanui a Bionicle or not?
I mean, he is, but he also isn't.
I would
Because he
argue that
functions
is.
differently from everyone else.
Well, so do many of the creatures that are within that
Yeah,
universe.
that's beside the point.
Is he
Yeah,
biomechanical? Is the question.
Yes.
But the thing is, to me, if it's if all the destinies have something to do with the functioning of the robot, how can he predict something that's not about the functioning of the robot?
Well,
Or
so
maybe I'm just being short-sighted.
yeah,
on that.
I think we need to sideline that for
'Cause
another
that's something we
discussion. So
haven't
let's talk about
seen.
in the concept
No.
of the Matoran world.
Hmm.
So in this concept, Madanui, as conceived, is all knowing about what is going on. So
Mhm.
I'm not counting the Madanui saga because that contradicts the Bionicle Adventures series. No, this is actually a great point. One of my favorite instances of Destiny in Bionicle is the Toa Metru.
Yes.
So, if you recall, so the story goes, Toa Likan is given a vision in a dream, I believe, that he has to pass on his powers. That might not be he was given a dream or something else, but it was written in the star the name of the Matoran who are supposed to become Toa. However, the stars had 6 different Matoran written, and Likan said within his heart there he knew the actual Matoran it was supposed to go to, which caused
No, not quite.
He says
Like
the quote is that these are the names that my heart tells me.
Yeah, but Makuta put those in his heart.
Yes, I'm getting to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm getting to that. It is revealed later that Makuta put those words in the heart of Likan, which also is something Makuta's like never done at any other point, but regardless of that.
But he does have that power. That's
Yes.
one of the powers, yes.
And then later we find out after a lot of other stuff happened, which is also one of the coolest stories in Bionicle, I think, that Madanui put the name of the Toa in Makuta's head.
The false names.
Mm-hmm. No,
False
he put
names in his head.
2 things. He put the true names in Makuta's head and put the false names in the stars.
Oh, right. Okay.
So
That's right.
in this portion of the story,
That was
Madanui was aware he was going to fall asleep.
3D chess.
And he was preparing for that eventuality by setting up protectors that would lead the Matoran out and then welcome in the Toamata, who were, he knew, there to awaken him if anything were to ever happen. The Madanui saga completely rewrites this, and which I don't take it as canon, and says that Madanui didn't even realize Makuta was plotting against him.
Yeah.
I prefer more of the omnipotent Madanui from the earlier portion of Bionicle.
What you want is the Matanui that is in complete awareness of everything going on inside his.
Well, you could. I mean, it's not really like a retcon. It's more like a. I don't know. You construe it, I guess.
You could,
say that
but then I feel like the story is less
plotting
powerful.
against him to put him asleep or something like that.
Well, because remember, by the time that Bionicle Adventures is occurring, like Madanui has already been Makuta's virus, and it just takes time for it to begin the system shutdown.
I can see that being a possible explanation. To me personally, I don't think that's what they're going for at the time the story was written.
You could also construe it as, if Madanui was technically already infected with the virus at that point, at the the beginning of Adventures #1, then you could say that a failsafe was initiated to activate the Toa Metru through Likan and his influence.
Yeah, I also specifically
because their destiny is to protect the Matoran, protect the brain, essentially. Which actually kind of fits in the case of like the coma patient that Madanui is at that point.
Yeah,
because he is essentially in a coma. So you got to do everything you can to protect the brain because that's now running the show. So that kind of makes sense from the standpoint of like where the creators were at with this.
Yeah, I think that's definitely valid in the way that it turned out.
Yeah, and remember that Makuta / Duma in the Coliseum with his sundials, like those are supposed to be like his synchronizing the watches until Doomsday, basically.
Yeah. So I still think at the time, and I could be wrong though, because this is back when they were treating Madanui more as a deity.
Yeah.
That they meant for him to be omnipotent.
Yeah, but they were at least maybe not omnipotent, but like
At least
omniscient,
omniscient.
certainly.
Yeah, to a certain extent. More like in a Greek god type way, but...
Yeah, because he knows he needs Makuta
Mm-hmm.
in the end, because that's why the great beings put it in his head to make...
Mm-hmm. But then I think the original interpretation is Madanui saw this as the only way to complete what he was made for. I don't think...
Yeah.
Because if he could have just destroyed Makuta.
Yeah. But like for whatever reason, he needed Pterodactyl specifically.
Because you know how we
Yeah,
talk
like-
about like this whole thing about Pterodactyl, he planned his downfall after downfall and had this whole misconstrued plan. But what's interesting is you take the interpretation from Time Trap, which is like the best Bionicle book.
Yes.
Then Madanui did the same thing that Makuta did, but better.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
And I think that fits more in the theming of those early half of Bionicle stories.
Could you say theoretically that the virus damaged part of Mananui's mind, and that's why he doesn't remember so many things after his reawakening?
If we're looking
not
to do
retcon
apologetics
it.
for Bionicle, then yes. But
Yes.
No.
I'm walking on apologetics to
No.
circle the square.
The literal real world thing is you can just see in Greg's writing as time went on, he took things in a slightly different direction. And for that
Absolutely.
new saga, he wanted to more humanize Madanui.
Well, I also am not entirely sure if how big of a hand he had in the specific Madanui saga, like that was released in 2010.
I thought he wrote it, but also I think it was adapted from what he wrote.
Yeah, he may have given them a brief, and then like someone else screenwrote it because it probably went through several drafts
Mm-hmm.
of microphone.
I'm not sure. Does Journey's End say anything about that portion? Has anyone read Journey's End?
I read
don't
Journey's End a
remember.
while
I've read
ago.
it a lot. But,
I read it back then, but I don't recall this portion. And again, that's why I don't take the Madanui saga as fully canon.
No, I don't think. I think Greg said like it's not.
Well, we know he said the images aren't fully canon because the images
Yeah.
show the whole planet crashing to Makuta's head. So,
cool images. though.
which is actually the part I would want to be canon. So, thinking back, I want to talk a little bit more about Nidiki. And for those who need a quick refresher, Nidiki was a Toa who betrayed his team, and then he was transformed into a Dark Hunter.
And mutated into a spider-like form.
Yeah.
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 By Rudaka.
Stop bringing
We
up
don't need to
Rudaka.
mention Rudaka.
Why not? She's a character. What's the
God.
problem?
You know, Ford.
Sorry, I'm having a President Pooh Bear moment, guys.
Anyway, so there is this line from Biosector 1. Let's take this and run with it. A being's destiny can alter over the course of their life given dramatic enough circumstances. So I'm going to propose a hypothesis to you guys, and you let me know if there's too many holes in it. So
Better have
Nadiki's destiny as he was created would not have been to become a Dark Hunter. But because he rejected the destiny which Manui had created him for and became a Dark Hunter, he was given a new destiny that was put into the broader course of Matanui's plan, and Matanui's destiny for his universe.
So Matanui destined Nadiki after his one slip up to damnation.
That is a good point, but I don't think... For example, let's take this back to real world politics. Was Stalin part of God's plan?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I
Well-
think a lot of us would argue that Marx was not necessarily part of God's plan, but somehow that happened anyway.
Part of the fall.
I am beginning to take the thought that like God meets us where we are. Relationship.
You're cutting
Like,
out
whatever-
again, Leo.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. That God wants to have a relationship with us, and part of that is taking boneheaded stuff we do. He will eventually redeem that at the end of all things.
Well, yeah,
Now,
that's
if
what
the boneheaded stuff we do is the Holodomor, I don't know. That's between you and God.
Here's the thing. There are certainly evil things that are bad and that never makes them good. But the scripture says God works all things for the good of those who love him.
Yeah.
So we must say then, was Stalin part of God's good plan?
This is hard.
I'm gonna be the guy who says yes. Okay,
Okay, yeah.
It would have to be.
I'll take the bullet.
For the ultimate good, it was used for the ultimate good in the end.
This feels too much like Alexander Pope. For days.
Well, you have two options here then. You got to say either God's not in control and that everything doesn't ultimately work towards good, which is a burden on the conscience.
Mm-hmm.
Or you have to say, well, no, that you have to say, yeah, that
The opposite.
yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
One or
Yes.
the other.
You know, I everything works towards an ultimate.
Now, what
Because
we did was not good.
there's no evil that God cannot. That is my faith.
So obviously, did God want Stalin to do what Stalin did?
Obviously
No.
not.
But did he work
Absolutely.
with it for the
Yes.
ultimate good?
I mean, the Soviet Union did eventually fall. Oh,
It didn't even last very long, honestly,
bruh.
in the grand scheme of things.
It lasted long enough to kill more people than Hitler could ever think to.
It
That is
lasted
true.
far too long. Very true, but
A horrible
it
thing.
fell fast.
And this world is full of horrible, horrible things.
Yes, but look, if
But
God can use the Assyrians and the Babylonians, he.
Absolutely.
so
I would
though
wager the
Stalin
Assyrians
just
were worse
threw
than
his
Stalin.
life away, Stalin chose to be an awful, awful person.
And so did Nidiki.
Well, so did.
But as
Well,
you were talking
he-
earlier,
he
did God
needed-
create Stalin to be an awful, awful person?
Yeah.
I don't think we can say
No.
that if we want to say we have a God who is good.
But I think we also need to consider like there were multiple Toa Mengai,
Mm-hmm.
and only
4
one
Toe
of
of Ice for
them-
some reason.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
only, if I recall correctly, only one of them got to achieve a destiny of some kind.
Well,
They all either
Eliminator saw
died-
to that.
But yeah, they all either got killed in action, or became evil and went to hell.
Which there's 2 accounts of that.
Yeah. So
For
the
those
only
of them
one-
that died,
Mm,
I'm actually not sure. Does it say in the writing that was not their destiny? Because Greg did say in one of the Ask Greg things that it could be possible in some cases that it was their destiny to, fail.
To
at
die.
not fail, but to have their journey end at some point along the broader journey.
But how do
I-
you know that's not reserved for people like Mitoro who needed to give their life?
Well, that's what I'm kind of exploring
Yeah,
here. 'Cause I
maybe he
don't know.
did.
I
Yeah.
think it would be also important to qualify again that this is a lot of this conversation has to be couched in terms of the computer intelligence
Mhm.
question, because that's what the Matoran end up being. Like they have a free choice to an extent of what they do, but what their destiny is to achieve is by
Yeah.
the needs of the overall program.
Yeah, what I'm getting
Does
at
that
is,
make them
like,
different
if there
from
were-
humans?
Well, that's why we have these kinds of stories to explore those questions.
Yeah, and what I'm getting at is that, like, if there were so many different Toa at the time running around Metru Nui, then it could have been just one of their responsibility to make the Toa Metru happen,
Yeah,
as that was Lee Khan's destiny. So maybe
and
it
keep
could
in
have been,
mind
like,
that
it could have been Chuyet's destiny, it could have been Nidiki's destiny, but
Also
because
part
they
of
fell
that-
astray, they didn't get the good grace of God to say, "Hey, do this for me, and I'll bring you to heaven," or something like
There
that.
also
I
could
don't
have
know.
been those parts of Lee Khan's team who died. Was their death truly in vain if it led towards, ultimately, Lee Khan creating the Toa Metru
Well, no.
guiding the Toa Mata, and then them bringing Mata Nui out of his slumber?
And
'Cause-
ultimately the world back to life.
Because
Yeah,
also keep in mind that the Mangai were brought together to fight off the Kanoe dragon, and then they just stuck around.
Mhm. My point
True,
more
they
so
weren't
that I'm
assembled by Madanui.
Mhm.
Interesting.
My point more so in this is just considering, because this does actually go into something Greg said. Was it their destiny to end there? And is that necessarily a bad thing?
I think I even asked him that question before. Like, is it somebody's destiny?
You
to
might have been
die?
the one actually come to think of it.
Yeah,
It
that does ring a bell now. Whoa.
it would feel better if the Red Star was not what it was.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Let's avoid that portion for now too.
Okay.
Let's talk within like the original Bionicle saga here.
Okay.
Before the deserts and red stars and
Now, are we pausing before Barra Magna or before Voyanui?
we're in an interesting spot where we're pausing before and after. Oh, even
Okay.
before Voyanui, yeah, after Voyanui. We're kind of exploring all the way up to the awakening of Mananui here.
Oh, then do we need to talk about Tren Krom and Karzani?
Oh boy.
And Artaka?
I don't think so in the context of Destiny.
No.
They all had destinies of sorts that
They
were
did.
very curious.
Yeah.
Well, it's very made clear that Tren Krom, or sorry, not Tren Krom, Karzani abused his power.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's an
and-
interesting point to destiny. That
Yeah, so-
it wasn't his destiny to torture those Matoran.
Yet, because he did that, we have the creation of the Toa and Nika.
That's
Yeah.
true, and they saved the entire universe. And they led Matoro to his ultimate destiny.
And yeah,
Interesting.
also,
Interesting.
remember we talked earlier, Matoran can only become Toa if it's their destiny to.
True.
They could have only achieved their destiny if they had the Toa canisters from Karzani, which they never would have taken if they were not trying to escape.
Plus, it keeps the Red Star's mysticism as an extension of Mananui instead of a
Mhm.
weird backup jetpack.
And that's not to say this is all original author's intent.
And no, that's all got away
This
from
is just a
everyone
fun
many times.
conversation to talk about philosophy and theology within the context of a story, because I think that's what good stories do, is they should make us talk about the true reality. Good fantasy should pull you back into reality, not out of it.
The human
Absolutely.
condition.
So again, I don't actually think this is like quote unquote the proper lens like Greg would have intended to interpret a lot of this as. I think Greg is more of a Rick and Morty fan at heart.
Oh, what a shame.
I can see that so easily.
Greg is a little bit more of a nihilist. I don't know that Greg, and maybe not, maybe I misinterpret, but he is very much in terms of, going down to just purely the material, which is not a bad thing. Materialism is sometimes preferable over Gnosticism.
You know, I was on Instagram the other day and I found this
Always a
account
poor decision.
about Solek,
Oh no.
and it's putting Solek as a great philosopher of his time. And in one of the photos, Friedrich Nietzsche, the father of nihilism,
the first Redditor.
wishes he could
Yep.
be just as cool as Solek, but he's still a pitiful failure.
I like how Ford goes onto the Selekian Instagram account and is just like, this is really deep and interesting, and it's just like,
I mean, it was a really good put down of Nietzsche, and I'm here for it.
I do want to point out, like, an interesting chat that Jorge Espinosa pointed out. He's talking about how the Red Star could have been interpreted of more so an idea of the resurrection of the dead in terms of Christianity. That at the end it could have been used to bring back all of the Matoran and the Toa who had died. I think that could have.
The fan fiction had to come in and be like, nope, it's purgatory.
I think that's what Greg's intent was.
That was Greg's intent, was
Yeah.
Red Star Zombie Maker.
However, I
Yeah.
do think he makes an
Because-
interesting point that could have been, because if you think about it, honestly, the way that it goes in the end, the Theology of Bionicle makes it just a horribly depressing universe to live in.
Well, because a lot of the stories were coming into this is the folly of the great being.
Mm-hmm. Which,
And so, like, when you talk about folly, you talk about very depressing things.
yeah.
Well, it's not even just the folly of the great beings; it's the folly of creation itself and trying to, reorient nature to your whim, which is what all great stories end up being at some point.
To an
Oh
extent.
man.
See, this is why I love Tolkien, though, is because his stories in the end, I was listening to this video essay the other day about why Tolkien, they were just interpreting why Tolkien probably didn't like Dune.
Oh,
I'm sure you've heard this argument. To be
it's
fair, we
because
don't
there were
know.
no trees. There are no
Tolkien-
trees, and he didn't invent his own language. That's why he didn't do them. It's going to be very simple.
This was actually talking more so, it probably came down to Tolkien's faith. And that Tolkien believed that good fantasy had to have a eucatastrophe.
The Catholics would have never sided with the Protestants. That is truly fantastical.
Anyway, and this is why, though I really enjoyed the Dune movies, I will say the story was not my favorite, and Leo's probably upset now.
Nah.
Yes.
Because Dune is a kind of a nihilistic story, in my opinion.
Dune is heavily up to taste.
Really?
I think it is well written. I think it is enjoyable. But I don't get a ton of personal satisfaction from the story.
Oh, because the story has a lot to do with achieving your destiny through violence. And it is kind of the opposite of blessed and love your enemies.
Yeah, well, as Tolkien's works were very much not like that. I think Tolkien actually in his lifetime handled it very respectfully, or even acknowledged, like, hey, this is a good work that he doesn't like.
Yeah, he never said why, he just said he didn't like it.
And he even said this is a personal letter. He wasn't going to go out there and say it. He said he would not comment publicly on it because it's another author that's still writing. He's not going to step on it.
Yeah.
He did not feel the same way about C.S. Lewis, but...
Well, that's because he was friends with
I know. And to be fair, I really love C.S. Lewis as well. And I think...
And C.S. Lewis is much more overtly Christian.
C.S. Lewis didn't do true fantasy as Tolkien would describe it.
Yeah.
He also made it very readable for a lot of people. Whereas Tolkien was like,
Lord of the Rings is
I want
perfectly
old
readable.
English.
What were you saying, Leo? Sorry.
Lord of the Rings is perfectly readable. It's the school system that makes us...
Truly.
Yeah, this kind of goes into something I've been thinking about. Now, the answer to this is no, before I even answer the question. It's like, would Tolkien have appreciated the lore of Bionicle? The answer is no, because Tolkien was a pretty grumpy guy and hated everything else.
I think he might have said the 2008 twist was pretty cracking.
I think as like the original concept, like the first, again, 6-7 years, I actually think very fall in line with Tolkien's concept of fantasy.
Yeah.
More so than C.S. Lewis, and didn't have the nihilistic aspect of Dune. Like I said, in reality, Tolkien really didn't like much else except for nature and his own stories.
Yeah, which
that's fair enough.
It's the nature part that makes you think he wouldn't have enjoyed Bionicle.
Well, Motunui is pretty nature focused.
Yeah, but it's filled with robots.
It's true. Also,
instead of talking trees, and the talking trees are
living robots.
I completely appreciate Tolkien. He was human though, and he was kind of also a grumpy old man.
He was a grumpy old man when he was 30.
Yeah, well, face it, they kind of are the people that write the best stories. You got to be pretty stubborn to write a good story.
Yeah. I can imagine Tolkien just playing Minog, and he's just like, why are these people all suffering? Where's Tom?
Now, if you replace them with non-mechanical creatures, I feel like Tolkien would have at least appreciated the world building of the original Bionicle, because it does follow his sense in fantasy, which wasn't really done at the time, being a world completely disconnected from our own.
Well,
he would not have liked the original script of Mask of Light.
Tolkien wouldn't say that his world is totally divorced from our own.
No.
It still follows the bounds of...
Yes, but different than the fairy stories that he would often criticize, where it's always leaving the real world to the fantasy world.
Yeah, that is also something that, at least from the story Bible that Christian Faber gave Duck Bricks, like one of the taglines is, "This could be an ocean anywhere on Earth."
Mm-hmm. Which
but it seems to be the South Pacific.
Which actually falls kind of in line with Tolkien's Middle-earth.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just find that kind of a very interesting aspect of, like, viewing through the lens of fantasy and how Bionicle as a whole, I think it towards the end, and I think it's because I get the feeling, I don't know for certain, that Greg delved a little bit more into the nihilistic aspects of his philosophy towards the end, especially the folly of the great being stuff. That is much more, like I said, Dune than it is Lord of the Rings.
And Percy Shelley, too, a little bit.
You'll have to define that one for me.
Percy Shelley's poem Ozymandias. You know, I am Ozymandias, look at my work in despair, and it's the statue that's in the blasted desert. All his works have come to...
You're a much more cultured man than I, Leo.
You'd recognize it if I read it.
Yeah, I probably would. You know me on that set or something. Like, I know a lot of bits of stuff, but I have a very hard time with quotations and names.
I mean, you should
It's one of the great
recognize
names.
Yeah, you should recognize Ozymandias. It's like the best episode of Breaking Bad.
Oh, yeah.
You're not
Also,
wrong.
it's also the reason that Rian Johnson got a Star Wars movie, but whatever.
I hated Rian Johnson's Fly episode. You think Tolkien would have liked Breaking Bad?
He wouldn't
Of
like
course
the
not.
I don't think he would. No.
There are
Yeah,
far
it's
too
not
few
all
trees
wrong.
in Breaking Bad for him to like it.
Trying to
But
think.
what
You're
is
right.
it, like,
I can't think of a single.
Ozymandias?
Is there a single significant tree in Breaking Bad?
Okay, he wouldn't have liked Breaking Bad, but he would have liked Better Call Saul.
Look, this is the man who did not like Macbeth because Burnham Wood did not actually rise up to attack the castle.
Yeah. Again, Tolkien really didn't end up liking anything except what he wrote, and even that, I don't think he's ever fully satisfied.
He would
with.
have loved Lost, though. We can all agree on that one.
Save
Like,
it.
he would like the first season of Lost. It's like, oh, the trees, they must be alive, right?
No.
At some point
That's
during,
what the monster is.
I think
No.
we've mentioned before, but we really want to do a Lost podcast someday. As in, at least for
Oh, yeah.
Mason, Kevin, and I. Leo has not seen Lost, unfortunately.
Nope.
But
And there's a
we
lot
should
to
do
talk
an
about there
episode
when
of
it
that.
comes
Would
to-
Tolkien have enjoyed Lost? Which is actually no, because Tolkien hated movies.
Yeah.
Well, what if we turned it into a book for him?
Leo makes it a
The
good point to get back
novelization
on
of
track
Lost.
here.
True, yeah, we've gone way off
For
topic.
once, I'm the one suggesting this.
So, going back to the Destiny, I do think the conversation with the Nadiki and the Toa and stuff does a lot to frame this conversation. If it was their destiny to die, was their destiny ultimately good? A lot of that does come down to whether or not we believe Mata Nui is omnipotent and is Mata Nui good, which is a conversation for a future episode.
But would he need to be omnipotent to do it? Wouldn't he just need to be omniscient?
Not necessarily.
Because if he was all powerful, wouldn't he be able to do much of that on his own?
I
It didn't
think
seem like he was all powerful. He relied on the Matoran
Well,
and
we're
the Toa.
within
Mace,
his universe.
remember Reign of Shadows is basically them versus the universe, and they lose against the universe until the universe lands on Bar Magna.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I
And
think
that's
it's
when
more
Makuda's not even in
Matanui's-
full
That's a good
control.
point, but
Yeah.
Makuda's like,
And
said we weren't going
an
into the
infant.
Bear Magna chapters.
But I think it's good to bring up because it shows more like Montanui benevolent than he is like authoritarian and destructive.
Because it's very obvious Mata Nui does care about the Matoran.
That is true.
But then, how do you have things like not the kingdom, but the Dark Mirror?
That, going into alternate dimensions,
Alternate dimensions suck. They are the worst part of people, and they should have never been introduced to begin.
I love alternate dimension stories, but also they are completely divorced from any real world doctrine or meaning.
The only
Yeah.
time I think it works is in the David Tennant Doctor Who when they meet the Cybermen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's pretty
that was
neat.
pretty good.
This is the answer I was
Am I
expecting.
missing out on something?
You're missing out on
No.
David Tennant as the Doctor. That's what you're missing out on.
Yeah.
Other than that, not really.
Because everyone's
But
like
not the
immediately
new
like,
David.
oh yeah, I can get behind that. But
We
yeah,
just
so
remember
for
the
the
good
sake
old
of this
days. Had to be there.
discussion, those stories are also where I see Greg dipping more into the nihilistic side. Not completely.
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
Greg still does have a very strong virtue of the hero.
Yeah, and even in the kingdom, that's very evident.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the Toa Empire universe is a very depressing place to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but
What
I
is
think
all
he-
that
they
with the
fix
army
it.
of shadow Takanuvas from
I
a
think
thousand different
if we
alternate
want to put the
realities?
best construction in kind of the framework we've been establishing here, we have to take those dimensions as literally the title of the story, the Dark Mirror. They're a look into what would happen if the rules of the universe weren't the same.
I mean that's every Mirror episode, like
Yeah.
back even the first Star Trek Mirror.
Hmm.
Yeah.
True.
And we would have to regard the primary Bionicle universe as the primary Bionicle universe, which it is.
Mm-hmm. No Earth One for Bionicle.
So
It seems like destiny might be a preordained purpose for the inhabitants to serve, but not one that they're compelled to follow in a way that
I would say they're
violates their
certainly
free will.
compelled, but not when they can't fight.
Not in a way that violates their free
It's-
will.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely one where like they can choose the easy way or the hard way.
Mm-hmm. And they
Um,
can choose to throw away their own life in the process.
Well, could
Yeah.
the Inika have died? Did the Paraka seriously pose a threat every time they tried to kill them? Could they, if things had taken a turn, actually died and failed their destiny?
Probably.
Or were they
'cause
never in
that
any
was,
danger?
that's what the kingdom was about.
But okay, if we were talking about the kingdom, if in the sense where the rules are different, though, that's not a good form of reference.
Yeah, well, no alternate universes right now. Just it's hard enough keeping it contained to the GSR.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd say
Let's
that's more
say,
in line with
okay,
the Dark Mirror and less so
Mhm.
the Kingdom and Silver City, or City of Silver.
I don't know. Let's just say Holly just gets freaking killed. Does that really affect Mataro's sacrifice in the end, though?
I mean, maybe.
But
Maybe,
that
but
just
like,
changes the point.
Yeah.
What if Motoro died then?
yeah, if Matoro died, then he wouldn't have fulfilled destiny, and then
But
you get
then
the
would it
kingdom.
not have fallen?
So
like if we're using
could
the
he
Toa
actually die?
Yeah,
That's
Well,
that's the
here-
thing. Like, if we're
what we need
using
to
the
determine.
analogy that I brought up with the Toa Mangai, then would it not be up to one of the other Toa Mari or Toa Nike or whatever they are at that point to do that for him?
Well,
I-
this-
Yeah,
I
would
don't
the
know.
because if the destiny alters at this point, because drastic change happened,
Yeah.
Mataro died.
Because
Does that change someone else's destiny? Like, let's say
Re-
Joller's destiny becomes
well, the kingdom is a
to
bad.
sacrifice himself.
remember,
they-
Ford, the it wasn't necessarily Matanui that chose Matoro to do this. It was the Ignika that chose Matoro,
Right.
which I guess you could
So-
say that's an extension. But
Well, yeah, it is. That was always the case because the Ignika is like so tied
intertwined,
to intertwined.
despite being
with
older than
Matanui.
Matanui.
It's like kind of like the conduit for Matanui to act through, or at least one of them. At least like the main one.
Well, yeah, if the
Two
mask
robots
turns
and
dark,
one robot.
Matanui dies. It's
That's-
literally
Yeah,
that's
connected to
something.
his life.
I guess like it never really got explicitly stated, but did the Toa Mari technically achieve their destiny?
yes.
No, by canon, I think Greg said they haven't yet.
Well, Matoro at
Hmm.
least.
Matoro did.
So I think the Mari as that entity they achieved their destiny. They're like the individuals may have to do. But
So-
I'm also kind of in the mindset with the closing of Journey's End, the destinies are up.
Yeah.
So
destinies
here's
are
the
kinda
thing
up in the air.
that we kind of have to decide in the scope of this project. Does destiny matter in Bionicle? And we can make all the technical arguments in the world, but I'm going to make an argument from the narrative perspective that it has to.
Yes.
Yes.
So therefore, if destiny has to matter, then destiny has to be achieved. Again, going by the narrative. And the narrative defines the rules of the story, in my opinion. The rules of the story don't define the narrative. Because otherwise you don't have a good story.
Mhm.
So in that sense, the question of if the Toa Nike had died and they couldn't achieve their destiny, well, they couldn't have died because they had to do it, because that's the destiny, because that's the story. It's just like, if we often ask these questions about real life, it often leads to a lot of anxiety, like, what if I did this or this or this? Would this would turn out better, turn out worse? Well, the answer is it doesn't matter because there's only one timeline.
Well, I kind of say it does matter because there's only one timeline. I don't believe any of this multiverse gobbledygook.
That's
that
what I'm saying.
humans
That's what
are
I'm saying.
forming. Okay.
Yeah, I think we're actually on the exact same path. What I'm saying is,
All right.
the question is, oh, if they died, would they still have achieved their destiny? Well, the fact is, they didn't. In the story, they didn't die.
Yeah, but
No.
time does exist. In when they started their journey, was it at all possible for them to have failed it?
Now,
I-
you guys might hate me for this, but I'm going to bring up Bionicle, the Mask of Light. So,
Yes.
Oh no.
in the
Bring it.
movie,
So there's this little boy who ends up on Matanui.
Takua is essentially running from his destiny, right?
Yes.
He's trying
He's
to
Jonah.
shirk responsibility. He's
VeggieTales
trying
and
to-
Bionicle are the same thing.
Shut up.
Didn't they come out the same year?
Did they?
Whoa.
But Takua's running away from his responsibility, his destiny, and it's turning out poorly for other people. Eventually,
VeggieTales Jonah came out the year before Mask of Light.
Okay. Confirmation. It was the inspiration.
Direct
the
inspiration.
inspiration, yeah. Eventually, he takes up the mantle, and even though it means sacrificing a lot to himself, Takanuva is like, yeah, no, I'm going to defeat Makuta no matter what. I'm going to reawaken Matanui, even if that means becoming this half Makuta, half me version of myself, which really isn't very well explained in the whole continuity of Bionicle, but
And I think that's a good
it's
thing.
a cool movie scene, doesn't it? Yeah.
Doesn't
So
he get squished by a door that breaks him into two?
He dies to himself and then
breaks
he
him into
resurrects
a mask,
himself.
but then he just becomes the mask and lives for some reason.
And that's why Bionicle
Because
is
the power of
fantasy and not
friendship.
sci-fi.
Yeah, well,
Because Takuda Nuva is there to sell toys.
But also, I think
Listen-
Takuda Nuva, just a quick point, goes from our broad point where Bionicle did shift tones at some point. Because that is completely fantasy then,
Mhm.
and
Such
it does
a-
not go with the sci-fi elements of the later.
Such an unutilized concept. I'm so sad now. Greg didn't
but
do
it does
anything with
kind
it.
of go into the earlier Bionicle where it's like, yeah, there's just you could combine the Toa into one big Toa, and that's just
true.
how it
Yeah.
happens.
And
it's
it
like,
makes it
it-
makes perfect thematic sense because it's structured. They're supposed to be taken up together in different combinations.
yeah, but then the lore just kind of goes, shrugs it off and moves
the-
on.
The lore forgot
Yeah.
it was building a conduit for creativity.
Yeah,
I'm kind of
so
cool with the combiners later becoming separate models, like, war turtles and things. I like that better.
The Kaida were based.
Well, they used to have both.
anyways, the point isn't that the fact that the combinations suck or that they don't
Yeah,
exist
They
anymore.
look hideous.
No, they should have still been tinkered with and iterated.
Let's have another
That's
episode on
still not the
combination
point.
models,
The
okay?
point is, like, Takua tried to fight the Destiny, and it turned out poorly for other people,
Yes.
but eventually he accepts the Destiny. And wouldn't you know it, he's working towards reawakening Matanui. He's helping others prepare the way.
Yeah, Makuta's the one that dies in that movie, and Takanuva lives.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, you could do some interesting stuff with, like, the Simultus et Peccator with Takuda.
The what?
What the heck? What just came out of
It's
your
Latin.
mouth?
It means simultaneously saint and sinner.
Okay. Yeah.
That it's actually completely breakdown. I'm kidding. I probably also didn't pronounce it right.
Well,
'Cause May speaks Latin. He would have understood me. But yeah, I think that does go towards a broader point where we established destiny does matter in Bionicle. A being can avoid their personal destiny, which the good destiny Manu is laid out for them. They can choose to reject that. And even if a being tries to run from their destiny, though, the force of the universe of Bionicle, which for all intents and purposes for this conversation is Matanui's will, ultimately takes control no matter what.
Okay. So with all that said, I think the question now has to be broached: is the story of Bionicle, in this case, a good examination of the human condition with regards to our own idea of destiny?
Certain aspects can be.
I feel like, yeah, again, there can be good examples of it, but there can be bad interpretations of the same thing. So
Yeah.
mixed bag.
Considering that the writer himself is conflicted on the idea of it, there are certain good aspects and certain bad. Greg has basically said that he has not defined destiny clearly.
Yeah. Which,
I mean,
part of that may be like George Lucas not clearly defining the prophecy.
Which isn't
of
a
the
bad
chosen
thing,
one.
because
No.
then we get to have these conversations, and then we can
Yeah.
interpret as something good. Is that 100% the original intent of it? No, but is that still a good thing? Well, yeah, if it leads to good thing, talking about scripture, talking about what is good, then that's a good story, in my opinion.
I mean, I would still say it's, it says something to the human condition.
Yeah.
Well, I think
hate
by
to make
default,
I
all
hate to
stories
make-
have to. Like the
Yeah,
Emoji
like I hate
Movie.
to make another comparison to.
Oh, shut up.
I hate to make another comparison to Star Wars here, but like the prophecy of the chosen one. There's a whole lot of different, threads in the
Interpretations.
web of how that works.
that misread, maybe.
Like Anakin does eventually destroy the Sith. Balance is restored by just making the Jedi, supreme over the Sith, and part of that is from the love of a father and a son. Like there's a
Suck
whole...
it, Kriya.
Yeah.
Well, actually,
There's
Ford,
a whole lot to
Palpatine
it.
doesn't
think-
die in that movie.
I'm
Despite
muting Kevin.
exploding
Shut up,
twice.
Disney.
So anyway, no, I think Ford does make a good point. This is actually something George Lucas intended with Star Wars, was to allow for multiple interpretations of the lore, and that included actually a Christian interpretation of the Star Wars lore.
And he was even about to
Himself
ask the
being a
question of why,
Christian
and then
Buddhist,
Disney-
Now-
after all.
Is there a danger in that? Absolutely. We do not take fiction as our primary source of philosophy.
No, of course not. But like you see it in other stories,
Mhm.
is the thing.
Yeah. But
and that's
you know.
important.
I do feel like every story we take in helps us to interpret things, and if we don't come with the correct interpretation, then we have to pick different stories to inspire us.
And I think that there are some stories which it's really hard to derive a good meaning from. Some stories are just made by authors who have a bad worldview.
Like
Rick
Rick
and
and
Morty.
Morty.
Rick and Morty.
I don't know.
But at
I've
least
not.
with Bionicle,
Kevin, I've never seen the end of Twilight. Is there any good to be found in Twilight? That is an interesting
No.
hypothesis.
No.
There's a
No.
vampire child that gets born and everyone hates it.
Except for the
okay.
werewolf.
If anything, it is a pro-life movie.
Oh, interesting
Yeah, they
philosophy.
don't abort
Interesting, not
vampires.
hypothesis.
Because Edward wants to abort his vampire baby, but Bella does not want to.
Interesting.
The
Spoilers for Twilight Breaking
Oh,
Dawn.
no, it's-
Wait, Leo, when did you find out about all this? Because you were there when
Because
we watched
my
the
wife
first...
sat me down and watched,
Yeah,
and we
to watch
watched
the
all
movies.
5 of them.
It was for the general effect of watching it.
No, I completely understand. We've done the same thing.
Yeah.
It was because you showed me Morbius and Black Adam. And so I thought, hey, I could do this too.
We collectively showed our friends.
I've not even seen Black Adam, but
I've not even.
Leo
It's
is
not
now
worth
the
it, don't
only
bother.
person I know who's seen Black Adam.
It's
But
so,
doesn't
it's
have
such
Rick
a bad
Howell
movie.
come in and he's like, "We need to talk about Black Adam." Yeah, pretty
It's
good
such an
stuff.
awful movie.
I've never seen it. But really, this conversation ends, so we probably should wrap up soon.
Yeah.
I do think there's an interesting discussion. I think there's more interesting discussions to be had here. I think it gets really messy when you get into the later portions of Bionicle, because I do believe it philosophically doesn't agree with itself.
Yeah.
Greg and Hapka always.
There is
at
a way
odds.
to be
know,
apologetic about it, though, I think, and make it all make sense to our interpretation we want.
Yeah. They're just other things that I'm discovering didn't necessarily make as much sense. They're not as thematically critical as like the Destiny conversation.
Mhm.
But there are things that bug me, like the 4 million foot tall robot And
Yeah,
that
which we had an
Moss
episode about
from
this too.
Interstellar,
Yeah,
apparently.
What was that episode called? Yeah, Bionicle Graffiti, where we talked about this
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
That was a good episode, actually. I'd recommend anyone that enjoys this go back and more on the Bionicle just lore side of it. Go back and listen to that episode.
Should we do Bionicle?
Yeah, I think
Do
so.
Boy.
Bionicle Graffiti 2.
Or we could call it
No,
Bionicle
call it-
THX11.
No, you need to call it Bionicle Graffiti again. I'm pretty
No,
sure
we
that
got to
was
keep
what
with the theme and
American
do
Graffiti
the bad
was,
George
wasn't it?
Lucas movies. So we can eventually
I
get to
liked-
Bionicle Howard the Duck.
Oh my gosh, yes. Can't wait
like
to see
I like
Duck
THX.
Rudaka, you know what I'm saying?
Shut up, Mal.
Bionicle is not a perfect story. I think literally one of the only
Oh.
stories, if you break it
I'm
down
not
and it's
sorry.
completely consistent in its lore and theme, almost, is Lord of the Rings.
Oh,
Also,
yeah.
apologies.
Yeah.
It's actually
And it took
called
literally a
More
man's
American
basically
Graffiti.
entire lifetime to not even finish it.
Yeah.
Like, even like Avatar, which is Last Airbender, pretty good during the first one, then Korra completely breaks it.
Oh yeah, in many, many, many ways.
I have elected to ignore Korra.
So do I.
Good man.
It's for the best.
Because the world building in the original Avatar is so good.
I can't see Korra as canon after season 2. It just
Yeah.
doesn't make sense. Like, you
Wait,
can
you
make
made it
leaps and
2
bounds for
seasons?
seasons 1, and maybe for the majority of season 2, but
I can't
the
believe
ending
you
of
didn't do
season
the
2
second
just
season.
kind of threw me.
Jorge has another comment about the plurality of worlds, an interesting concept. I believe we touched on that in our previous episode a little bit. Unfortunately,
go
with us,
back
you're
a
going to
couple
have a pretty
episodes.
quick shutdown of that discussion as we all dismiss the string theory.
The many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics sucks. Copenhagen.
Now, I think it's very fun to play with.
Yeah.
It's a
But
fun fantasy
I think it is.
concept.
I think it is full of more holes than our culture makes it out to be.
It is filled with Swiss cheese.
Which we could have an episode discussing that too, if we just want to, like, shoot at the string theory, just beat on it for an hour, through the lens of Bionicle.
You don't need to beat on string theory for an hour. All you need to do is say that one sentence is destroyed. There is no experimental evidence for string theory.
Yes, sir.
It's true. And yet that's believed more so than an event of a man rising from the dead where there are 500 witnesses and literally affected everything over the course of human history.
Brian Greene is a fraud. Shyster.
So, as far as we go back to Destiny
No,
and
I'm
the
not
classic
bitter.
concept of Bionicle, I think there's an argument to be made that the concept of single predestination could be interpreted in the frame of the Bionicle story. There are some issues with it, mostly, and you find this in any fantasy, is there a power that is ultimately good, that is ultimately in control? And so you gotta assume that for the course of Destiny, because also if you assume that there's no greater deity in control of Destiny, well then Destiny's just an awful thing too. Because then it just means someone who's imperfect deciding how all things go, and it's gonna get screwed up at some point. But because the narrative demands that there must be good, we must assume that there's ultimately a force for good. Could there also be a case for double predestination in Bionicle?
I don't really think so. Because like all the Destiny stuff is bound within the robot and everything connected with it.
Mhm.
And not necessarily outside. Because the robot exists in the end to serve. Like if we're talking about like the narrative thing, the robot itself has a destiny.
Mm-hmm. And I
Tells
think
everyone
also
sometimes.
I mean,
just the
just
fact
a
there's clearly free will.
slightly-
Yeah.
I feel like a slight counter to that. I don't think it's necessarily like a good one, but okay, Montanui gets transferred to the Mask of Life. He gets sent to Barra Magna. He still has his destiny that he needs
Mhm.
to fulfill
Correct.
Mhm.
to his
Well,
former body, not necessarily, but he still has like this destiny to.
He's got the job to do.
Which is
However,
ultimately to
you
bring
also
harmony.
you also need to remember that the mask was shot into space, and it didn't go straight to Baramagnet. It kind of slingshot around until it was like, "Hey, I actually need to go do this." So you could construe it as the mask of
Was
life.
it? I thought it was immediate.
Well, I don't think there was any definite like.
Because like you, if anything, you could say like it was shot out of the robot and then had a decaying orb
Maybe.
crash.
That's the way the
Maybe.
comics art interprets it.
Yeah. I like to think of it. Maybe this is just headcanon or whatever. But I like to think of it as while Matt knew he could not affect any change while inside the mask still had some kind of sentience and theoretically could have said, "Hey, I've got this like GPS coordinates to go back to Baramagna. Let's go." And maybe use that propulsion, the propulsion that it got from Mikuta, ejecting it out of the universe to do that. I don't know.
I think the Mask of Life certainly still is directing events, which is
I think it's a bit of a stretch on my part, but it does.
Yeah, because I don't think there's any way for the Ignika.
However, it could play more into the fantasy element, to me at least.
Yeah.
Because while a piece of technology would not be able to do something like that, like we can't just like recall the Voyager probe. It's already been out there for ages.
It
like
left the heliosphere.
Yeah, like we'd have to go and get it.
It's gone, man.
Yeah, we got to go and like get it.
The next time we're going to see it, it's going to call itself V'ger.
Yeah, right. But I don't know. I feel like that's more of a fantasy element, but it is a little out there on my part.
So we've established double or single predestination. There's a case to be made. Double predestination, it's harder to make a case for.
I mean, I don't think there's a case for us to make double predestination in our universe because
quantum
mechanics forbids this.
Just by nature, I mean, of course, discussion of the scope of like the state of man is beyond this conversation right now. But just again, I think there is like sort of a place for philosophy even in the real world discussing theology, though I would never view theology purely through the lens of philosophy.
Or through
just gotta look at if there's a God that is good, can we be comfortable with him predestining someone to hell? That is a hard question to answer. The more you think about it.
Yeah.
But again,
that's the end state.
Mm-hmm.
That line of thinking.
But we gotta actually look at like the context where scripture talks about predestination. And the only place it talks about predestination is in the context of being a comfort that God is looking out for us. Mm-hmm. It never talks about predestination in the context where God is going to abandon us and throw us to hell. So we should never think of that in a way that is to our detriment, but only to our comfort.
I also think it would be important to remember the Book of the 12, so the 12 minor prophets, because they were all sent by God to the people of Israel and then Judah. And why would God send them if he did not also anticipate there could be a chance for them to repent of their ways and turn back to him? Mm-hmm. So that he need not send the Assyrians with that. And I think that's what the book of Jonah is. Mm-hmm. Because Jonah goes to an unrepentant city, but then they repent because of his preaching and because God wills it. Mm-hmm. And so like that option is open to the Israelites if it's open to their worst enemies who despise God.
Yeah, so the Calvinism just doesn't allow for that.
Yeah. So God wants to be merciful to us. He can't want that if there are those of us who are predestined to damnation. Mm-hmm.
Does God know ultimately how things will turn out? Well, yes, because he knows the end times. The book of Revelation is literally a vision into the end times. Because if you have a being that created time, he exists outside of time. But for our sake, it's more helpful, I think, to talk about within our prospect of time. So, Calvinism asks the question, does decision theology, and I forget the technical name for that, could that possibly be interpreted within the narrative of Bionicle?
No. Maybe if you're just a scrawl or something.
I feel like the wider community interprets it as that, though. Or
Well, yeah, but the wider community is also
Sucks.
filled with atheists.
yeah.
And atheism does not necessarily construe itself to a high philosophical standing.
It does not. And that's why I kind of like one of the original intents of these episodes. Like, some people are going to listen. It's like, oh, you're really forcing your worldview into this. Yes.
Yes, but you do the same thing.
Mhm.
Yes.
This is
Can't
our
talk
story,
about that.
too. This doesn't belong to just the wider hive mind that's decided there's a right way to enjoy Bionicle, and that's what this series is
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, a good story leaves itself open for many angles of interpretation.
Including this,
It
which
doesn't
is the
necessarily
correct
mean it needs
way.
to be open to all angles of interpretation.
That's right. That is
Exactly.
also true.
Some are better than others, including this one.
Because there are some angles of interpretation that suck.
Yes. In many ways.
There are some lenses through which to look at the world that are just completely broken.
It's
Yes.
true. I think that's a
and
good place
those-
to wrap up.
Those
Okay.
lenses usually lead to mass murder.
It's true.
Or self-murder.
Yeah.
It's
Or
true.
even a mixture of both.
I guess the one we didn't talk about the principles from Nog. I just want to
We
point
know we didn't get a chance to. We'll have to do that another episode. But
one of the principles that derives from duty and destiny is prosperity, and I just think that's hilarious. As if you would be destined for prosperity.
Through hard work, Leo.
It does, yes, it qualifies hard work, but still.
It's the Joel Osteen mindset.
Now,
No, the Joel Osteen mindset has no hard work.
No, though, it is important, I think, to preface, because obviously we believe that, like my pastor often say, in the Bible, do good things happen to good people? Just answer yes or no.
Yeah,
Do,
they can,
do good things happen to bad people?
obviously.
Do bad things happen to good people?
Oh, all the time.
Do bad things happen to bad people?
Yes.
So when something good or bad happens to you, does that tell you anything about the state you are at with God?
Yeah. I
So
think
we-
that
And there's another verse that God causes the rain to fall upon the wicked as
just
well.
and the unjust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's just to say that we totally believe that, but it is also important. Also, God also says that if you follow the Ten Commandments, there will be blessings on this earth. It's a good idea to follow the moral code, and there are earthly blessings to that. Like, if you don't do drugs and you don't murder people, you're probably going to live a better life than if you murder people.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's automatically guaranteed that everything will go right. But it's just like talking in terms of those virtues, you know? There's not a complete disconnect from Christianity for, finding prosperity.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a guarantee because our ultimate prosperity is in the world to come. But I think that's an interesting point to bring up because a lot of people can fall way too far on one side or the other.
Yeah.
We can do another episode just on all those virtues alone now. We've had time to
the
go over the
principles?
whole the principles since now I went through all the three virtues. I think that would be a good episode as well. Because that's one I have not explored as much because Nog 2 is a nightmare.
It is a great game, and I will stand by that. It is more of a
Have you
game.
ever finished it?
It's not more a game than
Have
Nog,
you
it's a
ever
different type
finished
of game. Yeah, oh yeah, I finished it without cheats.
No, I'm talking
Metroid.
to Leo.
Yes, I finished it.
Okay. Your
I finished it
opinion
before
is valid.
Meso did.
Wait, he finished it as a child. He's one of the real ones.
All right, but I think that's a good note to end on there. I think that was a good discussion and a good lead off for future discussions.
Yeah.
As mentioned, be sure to check out some of our previous episodes if you enjoyed this. Bionicle and Theology Part 1 and Bionicle Graffiti are both good listening if you are into Bionicle. If you're not, honestly, just listen to our regular podcast if you just want to hear us talk about philosophy and religion and politics and culture and a light sense when talking about just something we enjoy, get a different worldview. That's really what this podcast is good for.
I think we do more culture than like politics. We delve into that.
Well,
We scrape
culture
that
culture is
sometimes,
like the
but-
ultimate politics right now. What else is being legislated besides culture?
No, he's got a point.
I mean, that's how you know we're about to get a slide to authoritarianism.
Yeah, this is not a like intently political podcast. This is just about
No,
having
unless
fun.
unless you're Antonio Gramsci, where the personal is political.
But if you just like having a
That cad.
discussions based upon a hobby you enjoy, they go a little bit deeper, take things in a little bit different direction.
Maybe
little
too
diff-
seriously.
Maybe sometimes not seriously enough.
There you go.
Then be sure to check out our podcast every week, usually around 9:15, 9:30 Eastern Time. Talk about all things Lego, sometimes other things. We did an episode recently about discontinued snack foods. That was fun. Leo, you weren't there, but I also figure you didn't eat snack foods as a child, so.
I mean, I did, but now all I do is I eat the cake my wife makes.
All right. As always, leave a like, comment, subscribe, all those good things that make YouTube like us better. You can follow us on X where we tweet sometime, or if you wanted to have these discussions, join the BCC Crew Discord server. There's a link in the description of every episode. Go ahead and check that out. So, for Ford, Leo, Mace, Malurs, and myself, LQ, we thank you again for listening, and we will see you on the next episode.